These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the two murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot.
This is the Thom
Women fought
Hartmann
women, and
Program.
spectators fought the policemen.
Hey, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you, it's the end of the week for us. And it's Anything Goes Friday. It's you and me all day, and whatever's on your mind, whether it be flying saucers. Actually, you know, I used to, for 15 years, 18 years, I've been saying that, you know, it's Anything Goes Friday. You want to talk about flying saucers? They're actually in the news now. Yesterday, I was walking home listening to the BBC, and there was a whole thing about there's this giant comet coming. It's going to miss us by 1 billion miles, but it's like they've never seen one so big. So, you know, it's... what if it's an actual alien spaceship? I doubt it. But anyway, whatever's on your mind, 202-808-9925 is our telephone number. I have a couple of topics that I'm just going to kind of toss out at the beginning of each hour here as, you know, for your consideration, things that I've been thinking about and noticing. And in the third hour of our program, I want to get into this new geeky side. There's an amazing new study involving well over a dozen states, thousands and thousands of people. I mean, like as in hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. I'll have to go back and look at it, but I'll share it with you in the third hour. Showing that there may well be actually a definite association between heavy cell phone use and cancer and tumors. Something that a lot of us were thinking about back when Ted Kennedy got it and then Joe Biden's son. In our second hour, I want to get into my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com about when brutal capitalism becomes more important than democracy. I'll lay out all the details on that in the second hour. And for this hour, just to kick it off, I've been noticing quite a few articles about, okay, we're back, right? We're all vaccinated. Obviously, not all of us. There's this huge crisis going on. CNN, in fact, is reporting that there are 5 major clusters of Delta variant COVID that are infecting parts of the United States. I mean, just like major clusters that in fact, let me find the actual story here. Here it is. It's titled "Millions of Unvaccinated People in the Clusters." More than 15 million people, only 27% of them are fully vaccinated. And these are largely in 8 states, starting in the east in Georgia, stretching west to Texas and north to southern Missouri. Clusters also include parts of Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. Bottom line, you can look at a map of counties that voted for Donald Trump or counties that voted for Joe Biden, and it's almost a one-to-one predictor of whether the vaccination rate is above or below 50%, or substantially greater, delta than that. And so, but for many of us, and for most of, kind of big city America anyway, and even a lot of medium-sized cities where people are not so addicted to Fox News and Tucker Carlson's lies about the vaccine and stuff like that, and didn't follow Trump so thoughtfully, I don't know, sheepishly. In those areas, life is getting back to normal. I mean, I'm here in the studio with Sean and Nate, and we're all 6 feet apart from each other, but we're not wearing masks. And Joyce, answering the phone over there, I still wear masks when I go into stores out of an abundance of caution, but most people don't. It seems here in Portland, we hit 70%. I think we only had like 20 cases that were diagnosed yesterday in all of Multnomah County, which is, like almost 1 million people. So we're doing pretty good and we're getting back to normal. But the question is, how are you adjusting to that? Right? Have we all achieved a new kind of homeostasis, a new stability, a new mental, social really, stability, where it feels okay to be under home arrest with an ankle bracelet on? It's like, yeah, okay, we just did this for 14 months. Ordering food in, not visiting with our friends. It wasn't so bad. In fact, there were some upsides to it. Louise and I binged watched some really great shows, and I got a lot of writing done. I wrote a whole book during this. It will be out in about a year, The Hidden History of Big Brother, about, social media and how we're all being spied upon and government spying and everything else. It was a fascinating book to write. I literally, yesterday afternoon, I sent off the final draft to the publisher for line editing and typesetting. So, but on the other hand, we have company over, we have friends come over, we have family come over, and particularly when they have unvaccinated little kids, I'm still getting nervous. And there's a fair amount of neuroscience over at theconversation.com. There are 2 fascinating articles. One's called Going Beyond Back to Normal, 5 research-based tips for emerging from pandemic life. Things like set realistic expectations, live your values, which literally involves making a list of how you think you should spend your time and how you're actually spending your time. Is this a time for growth or preservation instead? Recognizing your privilege and paying it forward. So that's one of their little conversations. The other is titled The Neuroscience Behind Way Your Brain May Need Time to Adjust to Unsocial Distancing. And that is that, and I think this has something to do with why recidivism rates are so high when people are institutionalized, when they go to prison, or in some cases, mental hospitals or other kinds of facilities where they're basically locked away. You see this, frequently with people with addiction facilities as well. And it's that they get used to, or we get used to the new environment. We develop a new social network within that environment. Like over the last year for Louise and I, it was every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, we had a Zoom call with all of our family all over the country. And it was really nice. And, we haven't done that in a while, and we're kind of missing it. In fact, I'm going to send a Zoom email out to my family members tomorrow saying, hey, how about tomorrow morning? But, I don't know if anybody's going to show up. It's like people are back to life and back to normal. And that's kind of a cool thing. I mean, it's actually definitely a wonderful thing, assuming that the unvaccinated among us in this country don't produce a new variant. There is now, they're talking about the Lambda variant, and then of course there's the Delta Plus variant that has not yet really hit the United States, but it's the Delta variant with another little mutation that makes it even easier to catch and easier for it to kill you. But if you're unvaccinated. The statistics just came in from June, by the way. For the entire month of June, I believe it was 99.2% of all deaths were among people who were unvaccinated. And that tiny little slice of people who died and were fully vaccinated were almost certainly people who, the vaccine didn't take because they were on immunosuppressive drugs, or they were suffering from autoimmune disorders, or, for some reason their immune system just didn't respond properly to the virus, and which is not the norm. I mean, they're very much the exception. So the bottom line is, if you're vaccinated, if you're fully vaccinated, 2 shots, or with the J&J apparently, you're probably in good shape. But how are you feeling about that? So, I got a lot to, there's a lot of stuff we can discuss. I mean, I'll just start by tossing those out, and we'll pick up your phone calls. It is it's 14 minutes past the hour. I'm going to hit a break here, and we'll be back with Anything Goes Friday, just taking your calls for the rest of the day, with the caveat of those two, a couple small stories here that I want to share with you, including in the second hour, what do we do? Actually, perhaps even in this first hour. In fact, I'm going to raise this question right after the break. What do we do if the Republican Party starts ignoring our elections?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How does a democracy respond when an entire political party that's in control of individual states says, nah, we're not going to give it to the Democrat who won? And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for everything you do. I just wanted to quibble about something you said on yesterday's show, that the Trump death cult was unprecedented in American history and the scope of its death and destruction. And
you're thinking of the flu of 1918 and the anti-maskers back then?
No, I'm thinking of the pro-slavery cult and the American Civil War, which reached 600,000 to 700,000 fatalities.
Yeah.
So the Trump death cult may get there yet with a breakthrough variant, but the Civil War, oddly enough, it's sort of a cult that Trump seems to endorse in his zeal to protect Confederate monuments and all. But as for just the scale of death and destruction caused, I would call the Confederacy a worse death cult than the Trump death one.
Yeah, I don't disagree. There was also, during the so-called Spanish flu pandemic back in 1918, 1919, here in Oregon, there was a famous trial. There are photos of it in the newspaper. In fact, one of the jurors wrapped a towel around his head and cut holes for his eyes, and other people were wearing masks. But it was a trial of a guy who refused to wear a mask, and they had mandated masks. It was not a national mandate. Woodrow Wilson was president at the time, and he literally never once mentioned the flu pandemic, even though he himself caught the flu when he was in Europe on a trip and got very, very sick from it, but he did not die. It was mostly killing young people. If you were under 30, you were more likely to die from the Spanish flu. And but there was this huge anti-mask movement, calling it government tyranny and all this kind of stuff. So, I suppose we shouldn't be totally surprised. But
by the way,
go ahead.
You know how Arlington National Cemetery got to be where it is?
Yeah, it was Robert E. Lee's plantation. They took it away from him.
Yeah, for delinquent taxes. And
I didn't know that.
It's a fellow Southerner who stayed loyal to the Union and blamed Lee for complicity in all the death that was happening. Designated it for a cemetery so that Robert E.'s front porch would be a bunch of graves.
Oh, interesting. How appropriate, right? I mean, how very, very appropriate.
General Montgomery Meigs, he blamed, as many others did, blame Lee for being disloyal to the country.
And the thing that people, particularly the monument fetishists, completely forget is that Robert E. Lee publicly, I mean, it was, he wrote it and it was published in newspapers, said, do not make any monuments to the cause of the South, the cause of the Confederacy. It is not, on reflection, it is not a noble cause. I'm wildly paraphrasing here, but you can find this fairly easily. He did not want there ever to be a monument to himself in particular, and yet there's Robert E. Lee statues all over the country.
Yeah, and the irony is, one of his quotes was rather disparaging of slavery as an institution, and yet the pro-slavery people seem to have tried to make a god out of him.
Yeah. Pro-slavery and white supremacist. Yeah, that was the basis of justifying slavery. So, yep, Mike, thank you. Well said. It's 20 minutes past the hour, or 19 minutes past the hour, excuse me. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So in addition to having our daily rant over at hartmannreport.com and the newsletter, Sue's newsletter, that has links to literally every story we talk about throughout the show over at thomhartmann.com, and you can sign up. It's free. We also push out a video to people who are supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com every week. And the one that goes out this week is about Loudoun County, Virginia's public schools. There is a group that is opposed to teaching critical race theory. It's called PACT, Parents Against Critical Theory. And they've been promoting the work of a guy who was among the people who marched in the so-called Unite the Right rally, where Heather Heyer was killed. The Jews will not replace us, black people will not replace us march. And he's just like making stuff up. It's really a remarkable, remarkable story. You can see the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. So let me just toss this one other thing out, and I'll do it fairly briefly. And that is, what happens when, not if, but when, Republicans simply refuse to certify a Democratic victory? This is the essence. It's not much discussed, which I find mind-boggling. But this is the essence of the Georgia voter suppression law, and the one that the Republicans in Texas are trying to pass. And it's contained in laws that are in over a dozen states, have already been passed in over a dozen Republican states. Now, most of those Republican states are not going to go for, let's say, 2024. Let's just imagine, for example, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris run for a second term. And Joe Biden is still going strong, and he's running for re-election, which is everything that he's saying he's going to do right now. So most of those states, it's not going to be an issue because, they're going to go for whoever the Republican is. But the so-called swing states, the states that could go either way, Texas, Arizona, Pennsylvania, they have a Democratic governor who's blocking this, but certainly their legislature is trying this. Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, again, Democratic governors who are blocking it, but the state legislatures are entirely controlled by Republicans because of gerrymandering, even though a majority of people in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all voted for Democrats statewide. And voted, the majority of people voted for Democrats to control their House and Senate. Nonetheless, their House and Senate, their state houses and Senates or assemblies are entirely controlled by Republicans because of gerrymandering. And they now have the legal ability, it hasn't been tested in the courts, of course, to simply say, it looks like Joe Biden won the election here in fill in the blanks in Georgia. It looks like Joe Biden won the election in Georgia, but we're not going to certify that. We're just not going to do it. We're going to send a slate of electors on behalf of Donald Trump or, Rick Scott or whoever the nominee happens to be, Ron DeSantis. What do we do? I put this out as a serious question to you. I've been struggling with this for a couple of weeks now, wondering what. Because, this is on the horizon now. It's like, you know, in warfare, when a new weapon is developed, it is 100% certainty that within the next generation that weapon will be used. And this is true for everything from the bow and arrow to the crossbow to the nuclear bomb. When new weapons are developed, they get used. Well, similarly, when new laws are passed that allow politicians to hold on to power that they legitimately no longer have, they will get used. So what do we do? Obviously, the first resort would be to go to the courts and say, wait a minute, this isn't right, it's unconstitutional. But, I mean, look at the makeup of the court right now, the Supreme Court, which is where it would end up. The Supreme Court already awarded the 2000 election to a Republican in violation of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. The state Supreme Court of Florida had ordered a statewide recount, which we now know would have given the election to Al Gore, now that all the ballots were recounted by the New York Times and the Washington Post. It took a year, but they did it. An audit, if you will. But the Supreme Court intervened and stopped that recount, thus guaranteeing George W. Bush would become president. So the Supreme Court has already thrown one election to the GOP, which brought us the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. Why wouldn't they do it another time? So, you know, short of getting out there on the streets, I don't know what to do. I mean, obviously the courts, you know, passed the For the People Act, which puts, you know, which standardizes statewide, you know, standardizes federal elections and also it eliminates the power of states to do much of this, but it's not even completely bulletproof. We need legislation. So anyway, all that stuff, it's Anything Goes Friday. Let's pick up some of your phone calls. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois. Hey, Russ, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. You know, Tom, I was just thinking and listening to what you said. Biden then should arrest him, found guilty, execute him with a Confederate flag next to him, say that's traitorism to the United States of America. But that ain't what I called for.
Yeah, I don't think that's how it would play out either. But
well, hey, you got to fight fire with fire. You know, that's what Trump would do. But yeah. I called. You remember? That wasn't Frank Luntz. You know the guy that made the Republicans sign that piece of paper that they wouldn't raise taxes, and he had it notarized.
Yeah, the oath. That was actually Grover Norquist.
Right. Why ain't we doing these to the senators, making them sign a paper, have it notarized? Which ones are for the filibuster? Which one ain't? Let's get it out in the open. Let's be honest. It's Shaneen. It's Tim Kaine. The guy in Maine, Montana, and California, Feinstein, they're all behind this, from what I'm hearing. It's not these two, because Howard Dean says these two are gone. Joe Manchin will probably leave the party, or they'll ask him to leave. Shaneen or the girl in Arizona could beat in the primary. And let's be honest, you don't tell the vice president, I'm a white senator. I don't know if you heard that when they asked her to step down, her and Clyburn. She told him, who do you think you're talking to? I think that got the vice president mad for next year's primary. But ain't it time we should know who our senators are for this and ain't?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's a bad idea, but I think it's time like Norquist.
I'm a little wary, frankly, Russ, of asking, you know, Manchin and Sinema, for example, or you know, any of the others. I mean, Daines, Coons, Tester, you know, to actually sign a piece of paper confirming that they're in favor of keeping the filibuster and will fight any efforts. I'd rather they had a little bit of flexibility. I have a feeling they're still convincible, but, you know, time will tell. Russ, thank you for the call. Do you think that these guys can be convinced? I'm still wholly on hope.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
If dies last, I'm still hoping. We'll be right back.
Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I've grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with the low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, ThomHartmann.com, we have, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter's extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Anything Goes Friday. Welcome back, Jeremiah in Coalport, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jeremiah, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I live in rural Pennsylvania, and I have been noticing, maybe within the past year, that the radio stations to which I listen to have been reduced in range because there have been right-wing radio stations and religious radio stations interfering with the broadcast range. I know you have talked about an explosion of his Spanish language right-wing talk stations. So I was wondering if you knew anything about an increase in right-wing talk stations, religious stations, and while you're answering that, could you also let us know, as a broadcaster, what the allowable range is for a terrestrial radio station, and whether or not these stations could be violating FCC guidelines?
Sure. Let me take the last part first, Jeremiah. The FCC specifies when you get a license for a regular commercial or non-commercial, for that matter, AM or FM station. The FCC specifies how much power you may pump out of your antenna, and how much power you may feed your antenna, how much power the antenna may direct that, which actually increases the effective power. When the antenna is directional. It's sort of like focusing a flashlight, and exactly what frequency you have to operate on. And there are very rigorous limits on how sloppy you can get beyond the edges of the frequency band in which you are allowed to operate. If your frequency is 1320 AM, you can't wander from that at all. And there are edges of that bandwidth that cannot be broken. I do know from back literally back in the 60s when I was, working in radio, and back in those days, you had to get a third-class radio telephone operator's license. You had to be a sort of a quasi-broadcast engineer. I was a ham radio operator, too, so I was real familiar with this stuff. And I know that there were stations that occasionally would crank up their power, or they would, tweak things in ways, but it was rare and it was illegal, and if you got busted for doing it, you got in big trouble. Wouldn't surprise me, though, given, Ajit Pai's FCC, that, if there are stations that have been exceeding their power limits, just thumbing their nose at the bureaucracy, although I've not seen any stories about that. Also, as time, there are also stations that have to reduce their power after dark because the radio, on the AM band anyway, radio signals will bounce off the ionosphere, off the atmosphere, and travel farther during the evening than they do during the day. And so there's a whole bunch of stations that have to power down. So that's a possibility, and I wouldn't put it past some of these guys. In terms of the explosion of right-wing Spanish language broadcasting, those are almost all leased stations. There are out of the, I think there's around 10,000 radio stations in the United States, as I recall. Maybe it's 8,000, but there's thousands of them. 3 companies own about 3,000 of them. And then, the rest are kind of scattered all over the place. And one of the businesses that a lot of people who own radio stations are in is basically renting them out. It's kind of the Airbnb of radio. And so, and the way that, and this is how almost entirely the religious broadcasting industry works, is, they'll lease a station, and let's say that they're paying $100 an hour for their programming. They then measure how, do we get $100 an hour worth of donations from the people who listen to us? If we do, we stay on that station. If we don't, we go to another station. And so there's a lot of churn, frankly, in that industry. And what's happening with the Spanish language right-wing stations is they're picking up these leased stations. And in some cases for 24 hours for the entire broadcast day. Sometimes a lot of them are daytimers, they only during the day. And sometimes they mix it with other programming. You'll also find stations that carry, highly specialized, polka music and stuff like that, serving particular neighborhoods or communities. So, that's how it works. I don't know that the interference you're experiencing is caused by that, but what I do know is that as a citizen, if you hear interference on a radio station, there are 2 things you can do. One is you can write a letter to the radio station that is doing the interfering, notifying them of your perception of the interference and asking them that they put that record in what's called their public file, which is every year they have to submit their public file to the FCC, which includes any complaints against the stations, and also let the station know that's being interfered with. And then secondly, you can also notify the FCC. And it's been decades. I'm not familiar with the process today of how to do that, but I would be surprised if it's not available on their website. So, did I answer your question, Jeremiah?
Yeah, I think so. But like most of what's happening is happening on FM radio stations. It's like one oldie station I listen to is like a 30-mile drive, and now it's only like 15 miles maybe. I get to listen to it before I start hearing the interference. I start hearing these. You
might call the station. I mean, it's also possible that they've got a problem with their transmitter and they're running on lower power right now because they're doing some engineering fixes or they're repairing an antenna. That kind of stuff happens too.
There's also an NPR station where I'm starting to hear this religious station.
Yeah. Give them a call, Jeremiah. See what they say. It could be any of those things that I mentioned. And most likely what it is the most benign explanation, which is that, this is the time of year when radio stations can do maintenance, particularly, you're in Pennsylvania. You really don't want to be fixing antennas on towers in the winter. And so you've probably got a lot of stations that are doing maintenance, and when they do that, they typically go to low power for a couple of weeks. So I would check that out. Jeremiah, thanks for the call. Don in Harrington, Delaware. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. By the way, did you get to watch Vera yet?
I have not.
You'll like it.
Tell me about it again.
It's an English police show based in Newcastle, and it's an hour and a half long. And you will not be able to guess who did the murder until like 10 minutes before.
Okay. And how is it? How's it spelled?
Vera.
Okay, Vera. Okay, got it. But that's not what you called about.
No, when you had Lamar on a few weeks ago about Nixon, I've never heard when he said that Alexander Haig found out about the suitcases full of money coming in.
Yeah.
What's the chances? Everybody said it was Goldwater that basically told Nixon you're done, that you had to resign. What's the chances that it was Alexander Haig said he was going to spill the beans about the briberies?
Well, that's a good question. That would be one to put to Lamar. I believe Haig was Nixon's chief of staff at that time, wasn't he? Or was he I
don't remember.
He was either chief of staff or some kind of a senior advisor in the White House. And
did he find out about this around the same time, or did he find it in his first administration?
I don't know. I mean, Lamar wrote this massive book on Watergate, the hidden history, and I've got it on my bookshelf right here. It's like 2.5 inches. It's a doorstop, and with over 1,000 footnotes. But I didn't participate in writing that book. Lamar and I wrote a couple of books together about the Kennedy assassination, but not about Nixon. So I'd have to ask him. It's always great when you have him on. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that affirmation, Don. We will do it more often. I always love having Lamar on, too, because his mind is like a steel trap. I mean, it's just amazing. Don, thanks a lot for the call. It's coming up on 44 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. Stick around. We'll be right back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. You and me for the day. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Exposing the con in conservative. I'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. John in Seal Beach, California. Hey, John, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
What's up? Well, I heard the conversation earlier about Robert E. Lee and losing his house to taxes. Mm-hmm. And I just finished a great book called Robert E. Lee and Me, and it's written by a man who grew up with that, the whole Confederacy being the lost cause and all, and then he kind of woke up in his older years. But he said what happened was that they had to, obviously Mr. General Lee and Mrs. Lee fled, and then the next year when the taxes were due, they wrote and said, okay, we'd like to pay our taxes, and they made a rule for them that they would have to personally come in and pay the taxes.
Oh, interesting. And the tax was $92.07, according to somebody on Twitter here just a bit ago.
I think that's right. I couldn't remember the exact number. But so she wrote back and said, well, can we have somebody come in and pay it in our stead? Could we, mail it? And they said, no, you personally have to come in. And, of course, that wasn't going to happen. So the date came and went, and they lost all that property in their home. And they put it up for auction, and then the government sort of let the word go forth that they intended to be the winners of that auction. Huh. And they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So they auctioned it off for taxes.
The things you learn, huh?
Yeah, this book was amazing. It was called Robert E. Lee and Me, and it was just this guy's awakening to having been lied to his whole life.
Amazing. I'll have to check it out. Yeah. John, thanks. Thanks for that. Good. Thanks for the tip. It's absolutely fascinating. Cliff in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Cliff, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey.
I don't know how you do it, dude. You're a prolific writer. You're a voracious reader. And I know at least you've watched some episodes of Columbo and Rachel Maddow, and you get up early for show prep.
I'm easily bored, Cliff. I'm telling you, it's ADHD is my superpower. Anyhow,
dude,
what's on your mind?
I'm worried about your sleep, dude.
I'm good. I sleep 7 hours every night, which is what I need. We all have, Louise needs 8. I need 7, so it's good. We're doing good.
You must be really efficient in what you do. Anyways, just real quick, with your voting rant, the only thing I can think of is pack the courts. I mean, that's it, right? I don't expect it to happen, but, I mean, that seems to be a solution. Anyways, we heard it 20 years ago, Tom. Afghanistan's where empires go to die. Russia failed over there.
Persia failed over there, 600 years before that. I mean, it's...
exactly. Not just Russia. It goes back a long history. And then, of course, Bush Cheney lied us into there. Mm-hmm. And I remember President Obama used to say when asked about the mission, it was like, we want to slow the momentum of the Taliban. All right, look, 20 years later, for all practical purposes, that was a total failure, the whole Afghan experience, right? The thing is, and people talk about we don't learn our lessons in war through Vietnam and da-da-da. That's a fallacy, Tom. It's not about that, and you know it. It's about war profiteering. So if this Afghanistan was a success to the defense contractors and the weapons manufacturers.
I think the Afghanistan war was about the TAPI pipeline, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline that they wanted to build.
Still corporate profits, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that was the bottom line. And the thing that the media, and this makes me insane, the thing the media constantly misses, we won the war in Afghanistan in less than 2 weeks. We took down the Taliban, Mullah Omar's government. We won that war in 2 weeks. We won the war in Iraq in less than 3 weeks. Everything after that was an occupation. It was not a war. Yep. And you know, if you think occupations work, have a conversation with, say, John Adams, you know? Cliff, thanks for the call. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our newsletter, our regular newsletter that Sue puts together every day. It's got a link in it to every single article that I talk about on the air. So you can see, you know, the backup for everything that I have to say. It's free. You know, there's some ads in it that just, you know, pay for it, basically. But that's it. There's that. And then, of course, over at HartmannReport.com, also no charge, there is our daily rant. So those are two things on the internet that we have. We also, you know, periodically put up videos specifically for the people who are supporters of our program. And you can find our most recent one. It's about guns. This sheriff in Volusia County, the sheriff deputy there, asking the media, you know, where have we gone wrong when a 14-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy are having a shootout with deputies? And Texas passing this bizarre new gun law. Anyhow, it's all over at ThomHartmann.com. You can find it right there. Check it out. And welcome back. It is Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I was just talking to Cliff a minute ago and about Afghanistan and Iraq, and you know, the thing that absolutely makes me crazy, and then I'll just pick up your phone calls again in just a second here, but the thing that absolutely makes me crazy is when they say, our longest war is ending. We've been at war for 20 years. No, we haven't. The war in Afghanistan was over in 2 weeks. That's how long it took to take down Mullah Omar's Taliban government. After that, it was an occupation. The war in Iraq was over after 3 weeks. That's how long it took to topple the Saddam Hussein government and, you know, and find and kill Saddam Hussein. After that, the war was over. After that, it was an occupation. And if you think that a 20-year occupation of any country works well, you know, have a conversation with King George III. It didn't work out so well in 1776. You'd think that as Americans we would understand this. But I think it's time to start referring to this not as the Afghan War or the Iraq War, but as the Afghan occupation and the Iraq occupation, because that's what happened in Vietnam too. I mean, you know, we were trying to occupy South Vietnam and the Vietnamese were fighting back and we were like, oh, it's the North. Well, yeah, sort of, but, you know, it was South Vietnamese who were, many of them, every bit as opposed to us as were the North. You just can't occupy another country. People don't like being occupied. It doesn't work. So, anyhow, picking up your calls, Nathan in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. Hey, Nathan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Well, a couple things, but speaking of the Afghan war and Vietnam and Iraq, what do they have in common? There's something about those three that
we were lied into every single one of them to begin with.
And they were Vietnam was the first privatized war, and ever since then, we've got privatized wars, and that's why they last so long.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. Those three wars made literally trillions of dollars for defense contractors.
Yeah, so why would they want to get out of there?
Yeah.
I mean, people, I don't know, it seems pretty obvious, but people tend not to believe it. But what I was originally calling about was my sister used to work at a bar in San Diego, and there's this old spook that used to come down and get pretty sloshed, and when he would get real ripped, she would call me, and I'd go down and talk to him. And he was the one that was sent out to Hawaii to determine when the Japanese were going to invade, because we had all their codes broken. There's a book called Day of Deceit, exonerating Admiral Kimmel, who was thrown under the bus. Mm-hmm. But I asked him about Roswell, and he said that he confirmed basically that there were 3 beings that died, but one of them survived in that crash. And
really? There's an old OSS/CIA guy?
Yeah, he was pre-CIA. He was OSS. So he, I mean, you know, it'd been 50 years, so he could talk about it. But he just flat out said, yeah, we're being visited by all kinds of different species. But also Paul Hellyer, the defense minister of Canada, testified in front of Congress for the Disclosure Project that, and he said the same thing. He said there's more than 20 different alien extraterrestrial species that are kind of like observing us and preventing us from exporting nukes into space, basically. I mean, it was pretty mind-blowing, but the guy, he was right about the Pearl Harbor. He said that Roosevelt had a week to prepare that speech because we knew exactly what they were doing. We knew where all their ships were.
Well, that was certainly the Republican Party was pounding on that. My dad went to his grave thinking that FDR knew that it was coming. I'm skeptical. I don't think that was the case.
It's public information now.
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's still a battle among historians about that. I'm not so certain.
This guy was not BSing me.
I did read a story that the naval officer who was responsible for in D.C., who was responsible for collecting the information from Pearl Harbor, and right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, had the paperwork showing that the fleet was on its way, the Japanese fleet was on its way. That naval officer was John Kennedy. I don't know. I haven't been able to confirm that. I've read that in a couple of places, but for what it's worth.
Yeah, he didn't say anything about that, but he definitely said that and it's known now that we broke their codes 6 months in advance, and the Brits had their codes broke about a year in advance. So, this guy.
Well, the flip side of that is that if you're FDR and you're watching Europe fall to fascists, and you've got a huge America First movement, led by a national hero, Lindbergh, saying that going to war against Hitler would be a terrible thing. Hitler is doing the right thing in Europe. He's making Europe safe for white people and all this kind of stuff. And giant movements. I mean, the Bund movement, literally hundreds of thousands of people every week were showing up for these rallies, wearing swastikas and Sieg Heiling. And that was what that's what FDR was up against. And so,
I know. We needed to galvanize the American public and go in 100%. And he had promised that he wasn't going to shed a single drop of blood on another foreign war.
Right. That was in the 44 election. He made that promise. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, Day of Deceit. But
I have.
It goes.
I have, but I still don't consider this stuff definitive. But I get it. There's still a debate, and I'm more inclined to have a more charitable view toward Roosevelt and assume that he didn't know, that he was shocked. But if I don't know, it's hard to justify letting Americans die in order to provoke a war, or in order to get into a war, no matter how important that war is.
But you got to admit, it's been used in the past repeatedly.
Oh, yeah. 9/11 in Afghanistan and Iraq, what we were just talking about a minute ago. So, yeah. Exactly. Nathan, thank you for the call. And I don't mean that to say that, Bush let 9/11 happen because he wanted to have a war, although, I think you could build a case that he let 9/11 happen. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled Oligarchy, When Brutal Capitalism Becomes More Important Than Democracy. And there's a point to that. It goes back to an interview that I had on this program with Stephen Moore. And this was years ago. This was back like 2008, 2010, something like that. It was long before he was working for Donald Trump. And, I asked him just straight up. In fact, there's a link to the actual interview. It's on YouTube in the article at HartmannReport.com. I asked Stephen Moore, I said, which is more important, capitalism or democracy? And he, without missing a beat, he said, capitalism. His rationale was that without capitalism, you can't have democracy, which is, kind of sketchy. But without debating that, the point that I'm making in this op-ed and that I want to make right now is that we are now in a full-blown oligarchy in the United States. And that's a dangerous thing because oligarchies almost never last more than a single generation. Oligarchy is rule of, by, and for the rich. For example, yesterday the New York Times was reporting, or actually it was the Washington Post was the one that I read, that the Sackler family, this multi-billionaire family, are reaching a settlement with the individual states that are suing them for killing 500,000 Americans with their marketing practices around OxyContin. The Sackler family is going to get to keep somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 billion, and they're going to give the states $4 billion over a 9-year period, which means that they probably will pay most of it with the interest they're making on the money that they have invested. But whatever. This is the new settlement. But back in 2007, they had worked out a settlement where they said, okay, we won't push these drugs anymore. Sorry, we didn't mean to kill all those people. And then, as the Washington Post notes, after that 2007 settlement, quote, the family members, including Richard Sackler, David Sackler, Mortimer D.A. Sackler, Kathy Sackler, and Jonathan Sackler, who is now deceased, demanded in 2012 the company executives come up with a plan to generate greater revenue in response to slumping sales, according to the Justice Department settlement. These guys are recidivists. They're repeat criminals, right? Career criminals. And they're billionaires, so what's going to happen? Well, they're going to have to take some of the dividends and interest that they're making off their $10 billion and pay it back to some of the states to kind of undo some of the damage for all those dead people and all those lives that have been shattered and all those families that have been destroyed. But they're not going to have to give up any of their mansions or their chalets or they're not going to have to stop flying in their private jets. Meanwhile, Jessica Resnick, yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, was just sentenced to 8 years in prison. 8 years, hard time. She's 39 years old. Her crime? She damaged a pipeline, an oil pipeline that was in construction. She, at her sentencing, she said, quote, the toxins we enter into our waterways here in Iowa enter into the Mississippi, which enters into the Gulf of Mexico. Going to this extreme was out of character for me. She was trying to save her community. She was trying to save the world. She's going to prison for 8 years because she's not a billionaire. I mean, it just really comes right down to that. And on the same day that she was sentenced, an ExxonMobil lobbyist and senior executive came out and said, we're not going to, we're going to block a carbon tax, even though we say we're in favor of it. We're not going to allow any kind of substantive legislation to pass that is going to move America off a fossil fuel-based economy. And by the way, I've got a dozen senators in my back pocket, including Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. We own them here at ExxonMobil. Now, it's not a verbatim quote, but it's, you can look it up. And so, he says this the same day that Jessica gets, sentenced to 8 years in prison. And nobody from Exxon is going to jail. Nobody's even paying a fine for like the heat dome that hit us here for 3 days with 116-degree weather that killed over 116 people in Oregon, killed a couple hundred people in Washington State, killed over 500 people in British Columbia, fried over 1 billion sea animals just on the Canadian coast. Exxon's not only is nobody going to jail, nobody's even paying a fine. And the fossil fuel money, it just keeps rolling in to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And if you and I try to mobilize to do something about it, to stop them at the polls, to stop ExxonMobil's efforts or their bought-off politicians, the Republican elected officials said, we can just purge people from the voting rolls that we don't like. We can make sure that they face a 10-hour line to vote. This is what the Supreme Court said last week. It's okay if Texas writes a law. Texas is criminalizing voting. They're creating over a dozen new felonies, all associated with voting. You help somebody fill out their ballot, you could go to prison. You bring them an absentee ballot, you could go to prison. You fill out your ballot wrong. You put in your full middle name instead of your initial, or vice versa. It doesn't match what your voter registration says. You can go to prison. They're proposing a dozen new felonies and it's very simple. I mean, they sent a black woman who voted after getting out of jail, not realizing that you can't do that in Texas. If you've ever gone to jail, you lose your vote. She voted Her vote never got counted. It got caught. But they sentenced her to 5 years in prison for voter fraud, you know. I mean, what we're watching right now is the final stage of this 40-year program that Ronald Reagan kicked off to turn America from a forward-looking and still evolving democratic republic into a white supremacist ethno-state ruled by a small group of neo-fascist oligarchs. That's where we're at. And as I said earlier, the problem with oligarchy is that they are unstable. They flip in one of, and the reason they're unstable is because an oligarchy, virtually by definition, is the oligarchs, the very, very wealthy, extracting wealth and power, political power, from the people. And the people at some point say, enough! And then the oligarchy, the institutional, the institution of these oligarchs does one of two things. Either it says, okay, we give up, which is what happened in 1865 after a 5-year war, the Civil War, where the oligarchs in the South tried to overthrow our government. Or they say, we give up like they did in 1933 after Franklin Roosevelt busted their plan to kidnap and probably murder him when General Smedley Butler spoke up. Or if they don't lose or give up, or they double down and they turn the country into a police state, which is what happened in Russia, it's what happened in Turkey, it's what happened in Hungary. And those are just, the European countries. Oligarchic governments always set up, once they get close to oligarchy, they set up the oligarchy and then prepare the way for this fascist state by, number one, changing laws and regulations so their buddies can own or control most of the media. See 1987, Reagan does away with the Fairness Doctrine. 1996, Bill Clinton signs the Telecommunications Act, which does away with local ownership rules. Number two, they stack the courts and regulatory agencies with oligarch-friendly ideologues or outright corrupt toadies. Look at what has happened, in particular during the George W. Bush administration and the Clean Skies Initiative, the Healthy Waters, and of course, Donald Trump's administration. Number three, they cut taxes on the rich and drive down wages on working people, while criminalizing or cracking down on dissent, particularly any kind of dissent that involves property damage. This is what happened to this young woman who was just sent to prison for 8 years. Number four, they distract voters from their own looting by demonizing minorities and encouraging racism. Is this starting to sound familiar? Number six, they actively suppress the vote among people inclined to oppose them, typically minorities and the young, or outright rig the vote to ensure their own victory. And finally, they transform their nation into a police state by heavily criminalizing demonstrations. You will recall over a dozen states now passed laws saying, either criminalizing protest in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests or allowing vigilantes to drive cars into them and kill people without penalty. They criminalize demonstrations, they criminalize nonviolent resistance, and of course they criminalize direct action, property damage, while they radicalize and encourage their vigilante militias. I mean, we saw this in Italy in the 20s, we saw it in Germany in the 30s, we saw it in Russia in the 90s, we saw it in Hungary in the 2010s. We're seeing it happen right now in the United States. Now, how do you stop that? You pass laws to basically outlaw a lot of this kind of behavior and break up the monopoly. I was very gratified yesterday to see that Joe Biden issued an executive order directing all the federal agencies to start looking at these monopolies. That's the step one to taking apart an oligarchy. Number two, you've got the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, H.R. 4, and you've got the For the People Act, H.R. 1, which will make it much, much harder for these Republican-controlled states to make it harder for people to vote. And in order to get there, what do we have to do? We have to end the filibuster. And I don't care if ExxonMobil does say that he's, the lobbyist and senior executive does say that he's got Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin in his back pocket, along with a few others. We still need to lean on these people. We need to blow up the filibuster. We need to end the filibuster and start getting something done in this country for the people. You had a Republican member of the House of Representatives just 2 days ago come out and say, our strategy from now until the 2022 elections is to block anything that the Democrats want to do, to create complete paralysis, I'm paraphrasing, to create complete paralysis and, you know, just totally demoralize the Democratic base so they don't show up to vote. We can't let them do that.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, end of my rant. If you want to read it, it's over at HartmannReport.com. Back with your calls right after this here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Anything Goes From. And welcome back. 18 minutes past the hour. George in Coarse Gold, California. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. About 6 months ago, Elon Musk came out against Bitcoin, or he made remarks about it, and I guess their stock or whatever it is went down.
Yeah, the value of Bitcoin went down, yeah. Yeah,
and he said the mining of Bitcoin is not ecologically sound or something like that.
Correct.
And I'm very technologically limited in my understanding. What is Bitcoin and how does it work? And are we all going to be not be able to use cash anymore?
Yeah. My take on it is that Bitcoin is the new 16th century tulips. It's the new rage. But the way it works is there's this technology, this blockchain technology, that there's a magic number that is the result of a series of mathematical calculations that when you identify or essentially guess the magic number by doing a whole series of calculations for each one of the digits of the number to come up with the proper number in the proper sequence, when you hit that magic number, the Bitcoin blockchain system says, yes, you've got one. You now own this. This is your Bitcoin. And so in order to acquire that, to mine that Bitcoin, what you have to do, and please understand, I'm not an expert in this at all, and this description is very, very layman and probably technically inaccurate, but close enough. So what you have to do is you have your computer, for each one of the digits of the Bitcoin that you're trying to come up with to cause it to fit like a key into this blockchain lock, you have your computer guess digit after digit after digit, through calculation after calculation after calculation, until finally you get one that fits like a lock into the key, and bingo, now you've got a real Bitcoin. And the problem is that the amount of electricity that your computer will consume during the period of time that it is trying to guess that number is so great that it may even exceed the value of the Bitcoin itself, but it certainly puts a load on the grid. And most of the grid in the United States is fired by oil or coal. So, you're burning fossil fuels in order to, quote, mine or create Bitcoins. And there was a fascinating piece that just laid out the math on all this that I think was published in Wired maybe 6 months ago. And it was in one of the computer magazines. And that was the piece that woke up a lot of the Bitcoin advocates, including Elon Musk, to the fact that, everybody had thought before, well, Bitcoin, you mine gold and, people die and you have to use arsenic and it's terrible and it pollutes and all kinds of things. So gold isn't ecological. But Bitcoin, it's just electricity. It's just electrons. Well, it turns out it's more than that because you got to get those electrons from somewhere. Did I answer your question, George?
Blockchain, magic numbers. I'm so confused, and I'm just afraid because it's like these autonomous vehicles and stuff. They're shoving down our throats. Yeah. It's getting ridiculous.
Yeah, it is, and Luddites arise, right? I get it. That's one of the reasons why I think that this is it's the new tulip mania, George. And I would be very, very reluctant to put any money in Bitcoin of any kind. But time will tell. George, thanks for the call. 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at hartmanreport.com. And our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Trying to see who's been on hold here longest. I do appreciate your calls. Brian in Anaheim. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you so much for writing Last Hours of Humanity. By the way, the time it took me to read that book were two of the best hours I've spent. If there's anyone listening who would like to get active but can't quite get motivated, all they need to do is read that book.
Well, thank you. It's a very short, it's more almost a booklet, but it distills what I think is the most recent data on global warming, and it's pretty scary stuff. Anyhow, what's on your mind, Brian?
And well, as you said, one of the best things we can do for the planet is put a price on carbon pollution, which means, of course, killing the filibuster. And I'm not ready to give up on Manchin and Sinema coming around just yet, but we need to be prepared for the filibuster to stay up until the midterms. And that means, in my opinion, getting behind a senatorial contender and sending them a few dollars every month until the midterms next year. So I personally am supporting Georgia's Raphael Warnock. He's a very vulnerable incumbent, and we really need him in the Senate. And his website is warnockforgeorgia.com. But I wanted to ask your opinion about some of the other races. We've got Congressman Tim Ryan running in Ohio, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman running in Pennsylvania, and obviously others. And I wanted to know if there were any contenders that you felt would make particularly good senators.
I think Fetterman and Ryan will make excellent senators. I don't know Fetterman. I've never met him. I have met Tim Ryan. In fact, I had a meal with him in L.A. years ago. He and I both spoke at Marianne Williamson's gig. He's a good guy. He's a meditator. He's not Bernie Sanders, but he's a hell of a lot better than a lot. And I would support either one of them. And Fetterman, I mean, he's just been delightful the way he's been taking on the Republicans. In Pennsylvania, and Pat Toomey is retiring, and Rob Portman in Ohio is retiring. So both those are open seats. I'm not endorsing anybody because they're primaries, and I try not to endorse in primaries, but I like both those guys. I believe that Mark Kelly might be up for, I think he was elected in a special election, wasn't he? Isn't he up in 2022 in Arizona?
Was he in Arizona? Was he a special election? I didn't know that.
I could be wrong on that, but I think Sean is nodding her head. I'm pretty sure that, he's up, much like Warnock, that he's up for re-election.
Yeah,
so
I think even those of us.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I think even those of us who are outside of these states, we need to start looking at it as a national team effort and start, because I'm in California. We're not going to, be electing any Republican senators in here. So we have to look outside the state and find someone that we can really believe in and get behind and start now.
Yeah, and the Senate massively affects California. So, it's very important to do that. Brian, thanks a lot for the call. Absolutely. Great to hear from you, and good on you for having that bigger picture view and not taking anything for granted. We all need to emulate your example, Brian. Thank you. We'll be back with more of Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We are just getting started. More of your calls after this short break.
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment but unidentifiable as a national army attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. They will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle but moderated by international conventions of behavior seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
We try to have a lot of content over at thomhartmann.com. And, of course, every day my daily rant goes up at hartmannreport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at thomhartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann program. It's over at thomhartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann program. Terry in Gainesville, Florida. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, this is Terry in Dade City, and I got a clever funny for you to kind of lighten things up a little bit.
Okay.
A friend of mine posted, he was talking with the anti-vaxxer, and he said, why don't you want to get vaccinated? And the guy says, I'm not going to be part of your experiment. He said, you already are, sir. You're part of the control group.
I love it. I love it. Sadly.
That's what I got today.
Sadly. Okay, good one, Terry. That was worth waiting for. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mike in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hang on a minute there, Tom. Was Lala Boo Boo one of those people that voted against that vaccination thing you were just talking about?
I'm sorry.
Lauren Boebert.
Oh, Lauren Boebert.
Lauren Boebert from the 3rd Congressional District. I call her Lala Boo Boo.
Yeah. Does she represent you?
No.
Okay.
Thank God.
Yeah. I don't know what she voted for or what she didn't, but...
okay. So. Well, my comments are, first off, she's got to be probably one of the most ignorant people in Congress outside of Louis Gohmert. And she went off... well, they're having the MLB All-Star game here on Tuesday, and she went off and saying, well, we want to watch sports, we don't want to talk politics, and
this is Major League Baseball, right?
Right, Major League Baseball, and wailing against the moving it from Atlanta to Denver, and I want to ask her and her minions, who are you representing, Colorado or Georgia?
That's right. They moved that game out of Georgia because of the voting law, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so here you've got a member of Congress representing Colorado that got the game, complaining about it?
Mm-hmm.
Seriously?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Something happened. Something happy happened to Colorado. That's bad news. That's Lauren Boebert's message, and she's going to get reelected on that message. You think?
I'm guessing. Can I make one real kind of a related comment? Real quick?
As long as it's not obscene. Go for it.
No. A year ago Mother's Day, a woman. This is voter fraud. A woman was murdered by her husband. He took her ballot and voted, signed her name on her ballot. This is after she's dead. Mm-hmm. Voted for Trump, and I'm assuming he voted for Boebert because he's down in, I believe, Pagosa Spring. Mm-hmm. So we do have a case of voter fraud here in Colorado.
Oh, John Fetterman found 3 of them in Pennsylvania. They did a huge statewide audit, and they found 3 people. A guy who had voted in the name of his dead mother, somebody who had voted in the name of their spouse who was, now out of state, right. and there was a third one, I forget the details, and all 3 of them voted for Trump. And you've got the Attorney General of Dan Patrick down in Texas saying that, or maybe it was Greg Abbott, the governor, saying, if you could find a case of voter fraud, I'll give you $1 million bounty. And Fetterman is like, I got 3 of them. You owe me $3 million, and Texas refuses to pay up. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's just the way it is. I mean, he's in jail right now, first-degree murder charges, and whatever the charge is called for. For illegal voting.
Voter fraud is probably the least of his concerns.
That's the least of his problems, because if they convict him of first-degree murder, his life is over. He'll die in prison.
Yeah, which is just, I mean, he committed a murder. That's not unreasonable. Yep. Thanks a lot for the call, Mike. Good to hear from you. Jim in Tower, Minnesota. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Just wondering about blue states like Minnesota. We've been fortunate, other than having Pawlenty for a few years, we've had mostly Democratic governors my whole life. And what about blue states gerrymandering like Republicans?
Some blue states are gerrymandered, and they're fairly heavily gerrymandered, but it's not. It has kind of fallen out of favor in the last couple of decades. So the last couple of censuses the Republicans have been doing it, I mean, at the level of the block. I mean, in fact, in some cases, they'll split a block in half just to get a few more voters to make, very, very safe seats. I'm not sure that, I don't believe that any democratically controlled states have gerrymandered that aggressively. But they're still gerrymandering, and that's, H.R. 1 outlaws gerrymandering. It says basically that, these nonpartisan, independent commissions are going to draw congressional districts based on math rather than politics. And which is what California did. I think there's 3 states now that have done this, and I think it's a good idea, and I think we need more of it. But the old fight fire with fire. Sometimes when you fight fire with fire, what you end up with is a bigger fire. And
where you get burned.
Yeah, exactly. More often than not, in fact, you fight fire with water. And so I think that the way to deal with this gerrymandering epidemic is to outlaw gerrymandering. And H.R. 1 does that, the For the People Act. And that's one of the reasons, of course, that Republicans are so opposed to it. The only reason that Republicans are within spitting distance of gaining a majority in the House of Representatives in 2022, the only reason is because so many of these states have been gerrymandered, that states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, those are the ones that I know of right off the top of my head. There's probably a half a dozen others, where statewide, the majority of people in those states voted for Democrats to represent them in Congress, yet the majority of their congressional delegations are Republicans. And that's purely because of gerrymandering. North Carolina is another one. We need to fix that. And that will end the Republican lock or near lock on the House. And that's, of course, why the Republicans view H.R. 1 as essentially an existential crisis. I mean, they're just willing to do anything to get rid of it. So, Jim, I got to run, but thank you. Sheila in Franktown, Colorado. Hey, Sheila, what's on your mind today?
Hi. What happened to Steve Schmidt? He's not on TV anymore, and I remember you saying something about him, but I didn't hear the whole thing.
Steve Schmidt,
the commentator?
And Steve Schmidt, prior to being a commentator, was the guy who ran the John McCain campaigns. And then he was one of the 4 guys who put together the Lincoln Project. And it turned out that one of the guys or maybe 5 guys who put together the Lincoln Project, one of those guys turns out to have been basically a gay predator. He was a man who was hitting on other men and using his position in the Lincoln Project to do that. And it's alleged that Schmidt and some of the others knew about this or had an inkling or should have known about it or should have done something about it and failed to. And so when it blew up, all of them kind of got smeared with it. And that was the point at which Schmidt and some of the others just kind of vanished from television. I think that, they're making a comeback. Steve Schmidt is all over Twitter.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not on Twitter, so I just noticed I really liked him. I mean, he was very intelligent, I thought.
I agree.
And
we've never
his opinions.
Yeah, we've never established a relationship with him. I would have no objection to reaching out to him and inviting him on this program. In fact, I think it would be fascinating to talk to a guy who actually was and may well still be, ideologically a conservative Republican, but is not.
No, he's
insane.
a Democrat. I heard him admit it.
Oh, he's become a Democrat now? Okay, but he was, and he could talk about, how the Republican Party has changed. I think it would be absolutely fascinating. And I hope he gets fully rehabilitated. But that's the backstory. That's what happened there.
Oh, that's what happened. I was wondering what happened.
And frankly, I don't know if it turns out that it was much ado about nothing, or if it really was a scandal. But whatever it was, at a certain point, you just kind of have to move along.
Well, it's not as bad as that idiot Gates. That jerk. I can't wait till he's arrested. You know who I'm
Matt
talking
Gates,
about.
Yeah, with the 17-year-old girls
He's
down
really a
in
crook.
Florida.
I can't stand him.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sheila, thank you. Bill Gates is having his share of problems right now, too. I shouldn't laugh, knock wood. It's, anyhow, 44 minutes past the hour. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Compassion. We all need to have a little compassion. On the other hand, there's something to be said for justice. Stick around. And welcome back. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Buenos dias, mi amigo.
Grüß Gott, mein Freund.
Sehr gut, mein Harry Froggen. Now, did you notice that Nate snuck a UAP into the bumper?
He was telling me about that. I haven't seen it because I can't see the monitor. It would just totally distract me, but...
It's very cool, very funny. Give him
there he
kudos
is.
for that.
There it is. Yep.
Yep. Now, I originally called about backing up, disagreeing with you about the Iraq rebuilding, but I wonder if I could shift just for a sec. Shift my focus to cryptocurrency.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. People call it Bitcoin, but what they need to be calling it in a larger sense is cryptocurrency. I've invested a lot in it. When people badmouth cryptocurrency, it does affect the price. There are stores, there are corporations that are accepting, there are countries that are accepting it. I mean, there was a time when we thought television was a passing fad. There was a time we thought cars were a passing fad. And right now, it is volatile. I will give you that, and I'm suffering from that. But I know that I think it's Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi who said, yeah, we need to regulate this. Mm-hmm. But I agree in this case that, cryptocurrency could stand
the thing that will step it up, Chaz, is when individual countries. There's two things that have the potential to happen that will make cryptocurrency more legitimate and something a force to be reckoned with. The first is if countries start issuing it. Big countries, major countries. China's talking about this, issuing or regulating it. The second is quantum computing. Right now, the amount of electricity necessary to produce $1,000 worth of Bitcoin might approach $1,000. But with quantum computing, you can spit these things out, like nobody's business. And whoever is the first person to take a quantum computer and, a commercial grade quantum computer and dedicate it to Bitcoin mining is going to become a trillionaire, overnight. Yep. And that's either going to really help Bitcoin or it's going to destroy it.
Yeah, and I'm getting ready for that myself as well. Now, and during that discussion, you said that fossil fuels were are fuels now, and I was in the impression that just recently we hit a milestone where renewables are more of our energy slice than fossil fuels.
No, it's not the case. That may be the case in Washington State. You've got a lot of water, a lot of hydro there. I just don't know. I mean, it's certainly the case here in Portland. We get most of our electricity. I'm pretty sure Louise and I get all our electricity from the Bonneville Dam on the Columbia River, you know, which is huge. Yeah. But and Las Vegas is powered by water. But as a nation, I'm quite sure that our electric grid is still principally fossil fuel based.
All right, I will look into it, and I hope you will as well too.
Yeah, if I'm wrong, you know, call me back and tell me. You know, I will put you on the air to correct it. But
I never hesitate, do I?
Yeah, no, you don't, and it's a good thing. I would be astonished though if we were, you know, more than 50%. At least in the, you know, taking nuclear out of the equation, but just, you know, more than 50% green power versus fossil fuel power. I know it's going up. It goes up every year. You know, 20% of the electricity generated in Texas is from wind power and solar. And in Idaho, I think they're up to like, or excuse me, Iowa, I think they're up to like 30%. But those are the states that are doing it right, and they're not hitting 50%. Chaz, I got to run. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at ThomHartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com and at HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. And let's see here. Chris in Littleton, Colorado. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hi. In a climate crisis, 30% of our carbon comes from gas-powered cars.
Right.
Why don't we all drive electric cars and put the gas money right back in our own pockets? Well,
that's the point of Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan and the infrastructure deal that he wants to do. They want to build 500,000 charging stations all across the country. And battery technology is evolving. Electric cars are getting better and better. I saw an ad on TV last night for an all-electric Volvo, and the fact that it was all electric, you know, with over a 200-mile range was like what they were selling. It's absolutely wonderful. One of my kids just bought an all-electric car. Ours goes 30 miles on a charge, and so we bought gas last week for the first time in almost 2 years, because it's a plug-in hybrid. But I think it's coming, Chris. I really do. And if you've ever driven an electric car, I mean, they have so much better pickup than a gas-powered engine because you don't need a transmission. You've got all that torque just boom right off the gate. You know, it's like being in a rocket ship. So they're fun to drive, and they don't smell things up. And my garage doesn't smell like gasoline fumes and stuff. You know, so I think it's coming. I really do, and I'm with you. We really need to push more of that. Chris, thanks for the call. Don in Evergreen, Colorado. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was part of the Disclosure Project, and I still know a lot of the witnesses from that. But what I'm calling today
refresh
about
my memory.
is
What was the Disclosure Project?
That was where we had over 20 witnesses that testified to at the National Press Club, and then we went around Capitol Hill and spoke to a number of our representatives.
This is about UFOs, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I'm calling about today is to give a little verification to the guy who said that at least one of the extraterrestrials survived the Roswell crash. I'm a member of a group that's called SSC, Society for Scientific Exploration, and it's kind of outside the box scientist. And one of my friends who was in the group was dying of liver or pancreatic cancer. He'd spent too long in the at Rocky Flats working with the plutonium.
Ouch.
But in the last month or two of his life, he had a full-time nurse assistant taking care of him. But he was still pretty high functioning. We went to one of these meetings. He was afraid it'd weird her out. But she says, oh, no, my mom was the nurse that took care of that ET that survived down in Roswell. I go, oh, okay. Whoa. I'm really wishing I'd got her contact info. But she said two of them survived. One of them died within a day or so, and the other one lasted about a year. They didn't really know exactly how to treat it, what kind of medicines or food, et cetera, but they managed to keep the one going for about a year.
So here's the question, Don. If you look at what happened to indigenous people all over the planet when they encountered a technologically superior civilization, in other words, Columbus, showing up in Hispaniola, or Cortez in northern South America and Central America, or the British and in particular the Dutch and Belgian explorers into Africa. When you look at, or for that matter, the Australian genocide of Aboriginal people there. In every single case, the advanced civilization not only ends up running the show, but they kill a lot of people and destroy a lot of culture in the process. What makes you think that a technologically advanced civilization coming into contact with us here on Earth won't do the same? I mean, shouldn't we be running for the hills instead of welcoming them?
In every single case you mentioned, the technologically advanced civilization was also a conquering civilization.
Right. So what drives civilizations into outer space if not conquering?
We could be descendants of their colonists. We could be a mixing pot planet.
So they're coming back to visit their long-lost cousins?
Yep, see how we're doing?
That's the basis of Scientology, the idea that 10,000 years ago, people from the planet Xenu populated the Earth and said that they'll come back and rescue us when we're all clear, when we all achieve some sort of psychological brilliance as a result of spilling all our secrets to the Scientologists while they carefully record for future blackmail, I guess is the
yeah, well,
or so it has been alleged is the scheme.
That would be about the only thing I agree with Scientology on then, but yeah, there's significant evidence that we are actually more related to them than we realize.
Okay, so what's the evidence that, I mean, the Human Genome Project is pretty exhaustive, and I've not heard of anything in our genes that doesn't track right back to previous mammals and even pre-mammals. I mean, our DNA is pretty much an open book. Where's the alien DNA?
Well, one of the some of the witnesses said that the scientists were wondering why the extraterrestrials that they were interacting with in the covert projects look so much like us. And maybe that's the wrong question. Why do we look so much like them?
So they did look like us? That's the allegation?
Yeah,
or
some of them do.
And they had iron-based oxygen transport system, hemoglobin and inhaled oxygen and expired carbon dioxide and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Huh.
No,
well, I don't know, Don.
Out there, but
I don't know. The stories of I knew somebody whose nurse said are kind of a stretch, but I'm willing to keep an open mind on all this stuff. It just doesn't make any sense that we're all alone in the universe. That's my starting point. Don, thank you for the call. That was fascinating. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
For our book club today, we're reading from Thomas Frank's book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. This is chapter 1, titled Servile Disobedience. Social scientists have tried for more than a century to understand how class works. Psychological experiments on the subject, however, are a relatively novel thing, so I was surprised to discover a few years ago that psychologists had published a series of papers on the behavioral aspects of social status, and that their findings were almost uniformly unflattering towards society's winners. In one 2009 study in Psychological Science found that in conversations with strangers, high-status people tend to do more doodling and fidgeting, and also to use fewer engagement cues, looking at the other person, laughing, nodding their heads. A 2010 paper published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that lower-class individuals, in quote, turned out to be better performers on measures of such pro-social virtues as generosity, charity, and helpfulness. A third study found that those of higher status were noticeably worse at assessing the emotions of others or figuring out what facial expressions mean. All of which is to say the rich are different from you and me. They are more rude and less generous. They don't understand, they don't get what others are thinking, and apparently they don't really care. Perhaps this is obvious to you. After all, people don't design toxic debt obligations by calling out what they learned in Sunday school. Still, the research aroused media interest. The Christian Science Monitor's 2010 account of one study ended with this quotation from Michael Krauss, then the University of California, San Francisco, who was one of the researchers, quote, "Being empathic is one of the first steps to helping other people. One of the first things we're really interested in is what can make wealthy people, affluent people, the people with the capacity to give, what can make them empathic?" I think I see the urgency of Dr. Krauss's question. After all, we have spent the past several decades doing everything we could to transfer the wealth of the nation into the bank accounts of the affluent to send them victorious, happy, and glorious long to reign over us. Oh, we've cut their taxes, gladly transferring much of the cost of keeping their property safe onto our own shoulders. We've furnished them with special megaphones so that their voices could be heard over the hubbub of the crowd. We've conferred upon them separate and better schools, their very own transportation system, and a full complement of private security guards. We've built an entire culture of courtiers and sycophants to make their every working hour an otherworldly delight. We let them construct a system of bonuses and executive compensation on the theory that it would be good for everyone if the people at the top got to take home much, much more than the rest of us. And when it turned out that the theory was wrong, that in the most famous cases, executives chased bonuses not to the shareholders' benefit, but at their expense, why, we promptly bailed them out. We allowed them to step into the Fed's discount window and fill their pockets. We generously transferred their reckless investments to our balance sheet, and we chastised them with little more than a polite request that they please not do it again. We've done everything we can to lift them up and exalt them as the new Leviathan. The least they can do in return, one feels, is to show a little empathy. Besides, look what we've done with the old Leviathan, the government. For decades, we've attacked it, redirected it, outsourced it, and filled it with incompetence and cronies. Yes, it still works well enough when we need to blow up some small country, but those branches of it designed to help our Americans of lower socioeconomic status, in quotes, as the scientists would put it, are now bare. We need the rich to be nice. We need them to stop doodling, paying it, and to pay attention and get generous. Now that the government has divested from the empathy business, we need the rich to discover brotherly love and fast. Come to think of it, wasn't that supposed to be the deal in the first place? The arrangement Andrew Carnegie brokered over a century ago when he made his big career move from Steel King to public library baron? The laissez-faire social contract would grant private business a free hand, but in exchange, those who piled up massive wealth were supposed to extend a magnanimous hand to the rest of us. As Carnegie wrote in his famous 1889 essay, The Gospel of Wealth, we don't need socialism to solve our problems. Philanthropy is the true antidote for the temporary inequality distribution of wealth and reconciliation of the rich and poor, quoting Carnegie. Going further, Carnegie argued that the duty of the man of wealth was, quote, to consider all surplus revenues which come to him simply as trust funds, which he's called upon to administer in the manner which, in his judgment, is best calculated to produce the most beneficial results for the community. The man of wealth thus becoming the mere trustee and agent for his poorer brethren, end quote. That same way of thinking led Carnegie to support the estate tax. Of all forms of taxation, this seems the wisest, he wrote. It was wise because it would, quote, induce the rich man to attend to the administration of wealth during his life. And if he didn't, then the tax would return most of his hoardings to the community from which it came, using Carnegie's words. Vestiges of the Carnegie attitude survive to this day. 2009 study of high net worth individuals by Barclays Wealth confirmed that American philanthropists tend to understand their giving in a context in which the state is either absent or irrelevant. And of course, there are plenty of nice plutocrats who don't fidget or doodle when talking to strangers and who have no problem endowing a ward or a wing in return for a commemorative plaque. The business headlines even occasionally tell of billionaires coming together under the leadership of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates to donate their fortunes to worthy causes. But the billionaires with the strongest sense of class solidarity have a very different plan for their disposable income, activating their lobbyists in Washington, building grassroots movements to march on their behalf, and using their media properties to run experiments on human credulity. Rendezvous with Oblivion is the
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back, Thom Hartmann here with you. I did promise to you that I would share a geeky science story with you, and I am looking for it. What did I do with that? Where did it go? Oh, no. Yeah, here it is, right here. Sorry about that. The headline, this is published over at KTVU.com, television station in Berkeley, Dateline, Berkeley, California. New UC Berkeley research draws a strong link between cell phone radiation and tumors, particularly in the brain. The researchers took a comprehensive look. I'm reading from this report by Sharon Song at UC Berkeley, KTVU, Fox 2 News. Researchers took a comprehensive look at statistical findings from 46 different studies around the globe. So this would be what's called a meta-study, a study of studies, and found that the use of a cell phone for more than 1,000 hours, or about 17 minutes a day over a 10-year period, increased the risk of tumors by 60%. Cell phone, the researchers also pointed to findings that showed cell phone use for 10 or more years doubled the risk of brain tumors. This is looking at studies done in the U.S., Sweden, the United Kingdom, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, a total of 16 countries. Now, that's kind of the bad news. In 2017, California regulators alerted the public. The California Department of Public Health in 2017 said, quote, although the science is still evolving, some laboratory experiments and human health studies have suggested the possibility that long-term high use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects. Health experts said cell phones should not be held in a pocket, bra, or belt holster because they stay connected and they're constantly beeping to their towers, those kinds of things. That's the bad news. The good news, I suppose, is that the amount of power that cell phones use to connect to towers is radically lower now than it was 10, 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago when it was just, you know, enormous amounts of power were necessary back in the Ted Kennedy days. So, you know, I won't carry a cell phone in my shirt pocket. I don't want it that close to my heart, which is sensitive, you know, to electrical signals. And generally, you know, I only hold it in my hand. And generally when I'm talking to people, I put it on speaker and I'll hold it, you know, a few inches away from me on speakerphone. You can't tell that the person has it on speaker if you do that. If you hold it, you know, a few inches away and the microphone is pointing right at your mouth, it sounds like you're just talking. And then the radiation is only on my hand, which is, you know, I don't think that big a deal. So I'm not hysterical about it. I'm not particularly worried about it, but I do think that we need to pay attention to this kind of stuff. So our geeky science for the day. And it kind of fits in and goes Friday. So let's pick up your phone calls here. Joe in Cupertino, California. Joe, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I noticed the other day you had said that you eat a little bit of salmon now and again because it's sustainable. I wondered if you thought about oysters because they're grown on a farm, if that's okay. But Robert Reich points out that the naturalized citizens and green card holders could have made a big difference in the election if we could have got them to vote. So voter outreach is really important. That being said, redistricting is based on the Constitution, and I can't find in the Constitution what it exactly says. I've been looking before it while I was waiting on the line here, but we have Wilbur Ross running and DeJoy running the post office in the former administration, and now the census data that we need in order to redistrict is not even going to be made available to the people who need to do this until after the election, the filing period for the 2022 election because of the delay. I can tell you from personal experience, the census was a snafu. They fired or let go people well before it was even done. But that being said, it's questionable at best. Now, I have a recall election here in California on September, and the filing period is open today for those people, Ro, if you're listening, that want to run for governor in case something happens. But then after that, we have the election for 2022, and that filing period starts. So I don't know how you can have an election or if you don't have the data. The Constitution says every 10 years, and you're supposed to redistrict based on the numbers, but there has to be an accurate count. What do you think about this, Tom? I'm wondering. Democracy is important, but if it's done sloppily, then we don't have really much to complain about, right?
Yeah, there's a lot there, Joe. First of all, yes, Louise and I were vegetarians from the 60s, from the mid-60s up until, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago, and then we largely stopped eating dairy products, which is something vegetarians eat, and replaced them with vegan varieties. In fact, when HelloFresh is one of our advertisers, we're also a customer of theirs, and the foods that they send us, with cheese, we just replace it with vegan cheese, so. But I do and have been for about a decade now since we moved to Portland years ago, started eating salmon maybe once a month, sometimes twice a month, just one particular meal and that's it. And I get it. That's not being a pure vegan. But it for me, it's what works. And I'll just leave it at that. With regard to our democracy, this census was totally screwed up by Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce who oversaw it. There was a clear effort to undercount minority communities and to overcount white communities. And I think a lot of the redistricting that is going to be done based on this census is going to be very, very flawed, and we won't know that for another 10 years, which is a real tragedy. I think that there's a good chance it's going to strengthen the ability of the Republican Party to control the House of Representatives. In terms of the Constitution, the Constitution doesn't spell out how congressional districts are to be drawn. The original Constitution said that for every certain number of people, I forget the number, 30,000 people or whatever it was, there shall be one member of Congress. That was later amended to bring Congress up to where it is right now. I'm sorry, I can't, off the top of my head, recite the numbers for you or the dates, but individual states figure out how to do it themselves. I mean, in California, it's done with a nonpartisan redistricting commission, based on math. In Georgia, it's done based on politics. I mean, by the Republicans.
And reading Section 1 of the Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution talks about being able to levy taxes based on the census data.
Correct.
And that you can't proportionally levy taxes unless. So the information that the census collects is pivotal in order for our democracy to function effectively. So, I mean, if you're like a doctor, you don't, well, you've got cancer, but, you don't do the surgery because you got to do this methodically. I don't see how they can't because of the pandemic, make an exception to the Constitution or something to that effect and say, well, when we have the accurate numbers, then we can implement.
I don't think it would work, Joe. I completely agree with your sentiment. And, that the fix is in. This was a con job by the Trump administration. It's going to echo down for 10 years. You could say the same thing about at least 2 of the 3 people he put in the Supreme Court. I personally continue to believe that he blackmailed Anthony Kennedy into resigning. And the Judicial Crisis Network and the Federalist Society spent tens of millions of dollars
I just want to say one more thing
to get these guys on.
One more thing, Tom, real quick. I understand that Rumsfeld bought the property of Frederick Douglass, and I think that if that's true...
No, it wasn't Frederick Douglass. He bought the property of the guy, it's called Misery Hill, I think, or something like that. He bought the property of the guy who made a living as a slave breaker. And it's the place where Frederick Douglass was taken for a year to make him docile. And it was just basically a torture chamber. And,
so this is endemic in our culture. We've got to weed this out. This census is not just the issue. This is the America that we're fighting. It's the people that want to go back to the way they thought the Confederacy got cheated out of what they thought that was their country. I don't know, but this is a systemic illness.
No doubt about that, Joe. But, like I said, there's a whole lot of different things you touched on there, but my point is that you're not going to be able to stop the census. If we were to say, the census, if the Biden administration was to say, it was rigged, it's illegitimate, we're going to redo it, or we're going to wait for 10 years, there would be an immediate appeal to the Supreme Court, and it would almost certainly win. So, it is what it is. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We've got a lot of repair work to do from the damage that just 4 years of an insane Republican administration did to this country. And welcome back. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's up? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Yeah, I just want to mention out that Iceland and Japan have been experimenting with the 4-day work week. Mm-hmm. And we really need to bring that here. I mean, it'd be just wonderful to spend Friday cleaning up your yard and house.
I wouldn't object.
And And one last thing about, geeky science, they set some beavers loose in parts of California. I forget, starts with a P. It's up here in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And it really helps reduce firefighters. And, we need to, because they create dams.
Yeah, this was an area where a river had largely dried up, and as a result, the surrounding area was rapidly desertifying, or turning into desert or high desert or whatever you call it. It was drying out and representing a fire danger. And they brought in some beavers, and the beavers dammed up this little tiny creek, and now that little tiny creek has created a great big little lake or pond, and the area is all well hydrated, and it's starting to come back, and it's just amazing. I mean, this is nature at work. I read that article that you're referencing.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to take on big ag if we need to break up. They're one of the many we need to break up besides big tech. It's big ag.
Yeah.
And one last thing is another it's Friday. I have some optimism. Is they in the East Coast they started planting the seagrass. They got like 9,000 acres that grows the seagrass, and it actually absorbs the microplastics that are in our oceans. So there's
that's
a little
interesting.
hope out
So
there.
what happens then? The microplastics don't break down. So the seagrass absorbs the microplastics. Then the seagrass dies, as all plants do eventually, and it decomposes into the sea, and it just re-releases the microplastics, doesn't it? I mean, or is there some effort to harvest the seagrass?
I just saw that little snippet. I'm trying to be positive.
Or is it metabolizing them?
Yeah, I don't know the exact. I just read one sentence that it said it absorbs some of the microplastics. It possibly, probably doesn't have the same strength or the negativity that it would.
Yeah, I just don't know. I've read about bacteria that, plastic is carbon-based. It's theoretically digestible. And there are organisms that they know will metabolize plastics. They're just not ubiquitous, they're not common. In fact, they seem to be kind of the exception. I think this was a couple of years ago, reading an article about an organism, not a super complex life form, but more than a bacteria, and maybe a paramecium or something like that, that actually ate plastic and could metabolize plastic and break it down to carbon and the basic elements that it made up in its gut. But I have never seen anything about that being done on an industrial scale.
One last thing. Have you heard about, I don't know if there's, you see stuff on the web a lot, and they said that they're using plastic, decomp plastic to make roads in India. Is that true, or is that,
I don't know.
Fiction? It just seems like there's a lot we can do with this excess plastic that we have,
Yeah, well, we need to get it out of our
Deal.
environment. But the problem with anything you turn into a road is that the surface is constantly eroding and being aerated. There's concrete dust around concrete roads, and there's asphalt dust around asphalt roads. So it'd be reasonable to assume the same thing's going to happen with plastic. It would just turn into microplastic. Jeff, thanks for the call. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Julie in Posen, Michigan. Hey, Julie, what's on your mind?
Hi.
Hey.
I got to tell you, I look forward to your show every day.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Julie.
I've got a crazy idea that would probably work.
Mm-hmm.
What if everybody, just to get back on the millionaires, billionaires, what if everybody donated $1, $5, $100, whatever they could, and put it all towards the IRS to get them after these billionaires? And then all the money they collect, part of that money goes back into funding the IRS. So it wouldn't affect, the Republicans and anybody else couldn't stop it because it's a donation.
Yeah. I think you're onto something there. I think you're onto something, Julie. The one problem is you can't make a contribution to the federal government. I mean, you can, but you can't make one that you say, I want this money to go to the IRS. That only Congress can appropriate money for federal agencies, and only the administration can specifically
But I could donate to a Republican that wants to squash everybody.
That's correct. You could do that. But here's where I think that you're onto something. Back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt created the Securities and Exchange Commission to prevent another stock market crash and put Joe Kennedy in charge of it, saying it takes a crook to catch a crook. Back in that day, he also created a funding mechanism for the Securities and Exchange Commission. And it wasn't taxes, or at least it wasn't general taxes. He created what was called a Securities Transaction Excise Tax, STET. They referred to it as the STET tax. And it was put into place in I believe it was 33, it might have been 34, but it was right around then. And it stayed until 1965. And what this tax was like a 1/10 of 1 penny tax on every time you bought or sold stock. It was just a little tiny tax on stocks. And it generated so much money that the budget of the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1965, I'm sorry, I don't remember the numbers. It's been at least a decade since I wrote about this in my book, Screwed. But let's just use imaginary numbers here. Let's say that that by 1965, the cost to run the Securities and Exchange Commission was $100 million a year. Well, that STET tax was bringing in like $600 million a year. Now, those aren't the actual numbers, but it was that kind of a ratio. The STET tax was bringing in so much more money than the SEC needed, and it was created to fund the SEC, that a bunch of Republicans in Congress said, hey, we don't need this tax anymore. We should just fund the Securities and Exchange Commission out of general revenues. And they did away with that STET tax. Elizabeth Warren is trying to bring it back because it would basically make program trading, computer trading, no longer profitable. And computer trading is one of the things that leads to volatility in the market and has created a whole bunch of billionaires who had added no profit, no benefit at all to our society. So to take this to your idea for the IRS, I think it would be probably something that even Republicans would have a hard time objecting to if Congress was to pass legislation saying that the IRS, the budget for the IRS shall be funded out of money collected by the IRS. Now, technically, that's all taxes, and so that's easy. But you could even tie it to money that the IRS collects from the top 5% or from corporations or something like that. And over time, it would be generative. It would bring in more money, which would increase the IRS's budget if it was done right.
I mean, $1 trillion a year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's past how many years? That could give health care. That could give so many things to the people that wouldn't cost, that wouldn't generate, all the.
I'm completely with you. If we simply had the tax money that we have been cheated out of by these companies and by a whole bunch of billionaire families, we could have Medicare for all. Absolutely. Julie, thank you for the call. That is a great idea. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thank you. My question is, ExxonMobil is worth $1 trillion, and Biden, the president, can stamp coins without Congress input. My suggestion is that Biden stamp a one-time $1 trillion coin, buy ExxonMobil, and use all the world and people knowledge and put them all to work and have a mindset of these employees that green energy is a moneymaker and tell the world change is coming. What do you think?
It's not a crazy idea. First of all, the modern monetary theory people have been suggesting for some time that the Treasury, which you're right, the Constitution gives the Treasury the authority not to issue paper money, but to issue coins. And so the Treasury, without the input from the Fed and without even an act of Congress, could issue a $1 trillion coin, sell it, deposit that money, with the federal government, and pay down the deficit at the very least, which is what they're recommending. Buying ExxonMobil, geez, why not? I mean, basically federalize it in a friendly way. You could use the Fifth Amendment's taking clause, and do it by virtue of eminent domain, for that matter. You would have to reimburse them. But Dave, I'm not wholly opposed to that. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Talked about modern monetary theory. We should get, what's her name? Stephanie Kelton. That's right. We should get Stephanie back on the program.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention Riot Girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation and Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Paul in Big Sandy Mush Creek, North Carolina. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Tom, thank you so much for taking my call, and first-time caller, long-time listener, watcher, and
Thank you, Paul.
I just feel so grateful to be a part of your, universal multi-log that is the most inspiring, uplifting, and brilliant multi-log, I think, on Mother Earth.
Thank you, Paul. So what did you call about?
So I called about today is the Everything Friday, and just for your listeners and viewers who would like a reference on all things of the universe, starknowledge.org is a website they might want to check out. Chief Golden Light Eagle has conferences every year, and they talk about the star nations. So I think a lot of your viewers and listeners would be interested in checking that out. But my question to you is if you have anything on the Hartmann Report, or if you can point us to any other outstanding resources for defeating Congress people like we have here in Western North Carolina. Our prior congressperson in the 11th Congressional District was none other than Mark Meadows, and our current congressperson is none other than Madison Cawthorn. So we would love to find ways to inspire our electorate here to find other candidates to elect.
There is a Democrat, a progressive Democrat with some substantial crud who is running in the Democratic primary to take on Madison Cawthorn. And but I frankly, I'm on his mailing list, but I can't tell you his name right off the top of my head. It's
right. I'll have to look that up as well.
But it's worth checking into. I mean, that's the key is, find good, strong candidates who can actually win elections, get them through the primaries and into the general, and then do everything you can to support them. In terms of good organizations, there's a bunch of great organizations out there, MoveToAmend.org, Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org. I think probably the most sophisticated and, well and professionally run of the grassroots organizations. It used to be MoveOn.org, but now I think it's Indivisible.org. And you can sign up with them, and they send out, it's not, you don't get a lot of, spam stuff from them. I'm on their mailing list, and it's maybe once a week or so, and it's here's specifically what you can do, here's who needs to be contacted, here's the phone numbers to call, here's how to reach out to people. I mean, they it's run by a bunch of former congressional staffers, and so they absolutely know how to influence Congress. So those are the things I would do, Paul. Plus, reach out to your local Democratic Party and say, hey, I'd like to show up for your meetings. I'd like to help out. If you can give them some money, great. But if you can't, they would be, frankly, probably more grateful for your time than for your cash. So, that's my list.
Yeah, well, those are great resources for us to check out and be a part of. So, and I'm sure all your viewers and listeners can apply those points to their congressional districts if they have anybody there that they would like to replace.
Hopefully, yes, hopefully. Yeah. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for being a first-time caller. I appreciate it. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to share a brief Twitter exchange that I had with Representative Dan Crenshaw.
He's the right-wing guy with the eye patch, right? Who's on Fox all the time?
So he sent out a tweet about Sha'Carri Richardson, the Olympic athlete that was banned for weed. It was actually a nice tweet. He said that, she's handled this with a lot of grace and class, and we'll be rooting for her when she goes for a gold medal. And so I replied back to him, and I said, but if she turns away from the flag, you'll want her kicked off the team, right? And he actually responded to me. And he said, yeah, because it's about representing the flag. It's called Team USA. And so I replied back to him and said, you just had a riot on the Capitol where police officers were beaten with American flags. You care more about symbolic patriotism than trying to overthrow the government by force. And, he didn't respond to that. But I just wanted to share that.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah.
This is the same guy that rails about cancel culture, but, if you exercise your freedom to protest, then he wants you kicked off the Olympic team.
Well, this is the problem with these so-called conservatives. They're if you drill even one layer down into the logical structure of their I was going to say their universe, but really it's their proposition. The argument that they're trying to make. Typically, you can puncture it with one, just drilling down one level of logic. Sometimes you have to go two, and it's why the Republican Party, sadly, has become essentially the party of stupid people. Not necessarily people who are like born stupid, but people who have chosen to live in a universe filled with misinformation and lies. The Foxosphere and the right-wing blogosphere and informing themselves with the right-wing hate radio. These are all media systems and outlets where if you challenge them with facts, they just shut you down or ignore you, as opposed to generally what you find among progressives and broadly among Democrats, but certainly among progressives, is if you challenge them, if you can make a case, if you can prove that there's a better way, or that way doesn't work, and this way is is going to be more effective, or whatever, people will change their mind. People will adopt new things. People will acknowledge that. I regularly point out when I'm wrong. It doesn't.
Well, he's also jumped on the bandwagon with the whole critical race theory thing.
Oh yeah.
I noticed that every time he tweets about that, people always respond, define critical race theory.
Yeah.
So it's like they don't. I guess it seems like the right wing. They always have a uniform standard set of talking points for the week, and they all just repeat the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and this is a precedent that was set during the Reagan administration. and that went on steroids when Newt Gingrich, in I think it was '96, took over the House of Representatives and started establishing literally daily talking points for Republicans. And you know, and then over the years, you've seen groups like, you know, Freedom Works and others start pushing those things out, and they get picked up by right-wing hate radio, and then it gets picked up by Fox, and then it goes over to Drudge, and then it goes, you know, and then the mainstream media starts picking it up, and there's nothing like that on the left. There's this massive propaganda infrastructure on the right, and on the left, we've got. You got me, I mean, and my colleagues, you know, and there's some great progressive programs out there and some great progressive commentators, but the platform of, for example, of Fox News just doesn't exist on the left, you know, of that.
Well, anyway,
that
I just thought you'd find that funny, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Kevin. That's fascinating. Good on you for talking back to Madison there. Sonny in Marin County, California. Hey, Sonny, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's nice to speak to you.
Thank you.
Thanks. This mystery about why 1/3 of our nation refuses to be vaccinated is my topic. Mm-hmm. The mystery. I was watching MSNBC yesterday, and they put up two graphs. One was the map, I should say, of the Biden election in 2020, and the other is the present map of who is not getting the COVID vaccine,
right,
and who is, and it was identical. It looks exactly identical.
Yeah, I know.
Which was it was shocking, but they went on to say that now we have 97% of physicians in this country who are fully vaccinated, mm-hmm. and then talked about, well, who does the 30% listen to? Mm-hmm. And then we all have heard this many times. They listen to their personal physicians. Hence, President Biden's idea of going door to door, trying to get into these communities, was rejected fully as a government at the door thing. But in all these conversations, I hear over and over again that they will listen to their personal physicians. And I would like some group to interview these physicians, because there seems to be a conflict of interest if they are all vaccinated. And in these deep red states, their patients are not. And it's not because it's hesitancy. It's political.
Well, I think you probably got a lot of doctors who are. First of all, doctors don't routinely see their patients, you know, with great frequency. I mean, I see my doctor every year for a physical, and that's it. And a lot of people do that every other year. So, you know, unless you've got a problem, you're not hanging out with your doctor and having an opportunity for them to give you a sales pitch for a vaccine. Although I would argue that any physician has an obligation to send out an email or even a physical mail to everybody that is a patient of theirs, telling them where they can get vaccinated and recommending that they do so. I don't know.
I would argue that they won't do that because it is not in their interest, right?
Well, I think that there probably is a legitimate concern among many physicians of being perceived as being political, and this is where this YouGov poll comes out. And I don't know if, excuse me, Sonny, if you saw this, but they asked, how much do you trust medical advice from each of the following officials? Now, this doesn't include doctors, it's officials. And this was a question that they asked of American adults who had answered a previous question, I will not get vaccinated. So they're exclusively asking people who will not get vaccinated, who do you trust for medical advice? And 53% of them said they trust Donald Trump a lot, and an additional 23% of them said they're okay with Donald Trump's advice. So you've got, what is that? 76% of people who won't get vaccinated say that they trust or will listen to Donald Trump for medical advice. Only 19% say they don't trust him. On the other hand, 75% of those same people said that they don't trust Joe Biden, and only 7% said that they do trust Joe Biden. So what you're seeing with medical advice. So what you're seeing is that politics has completely contaminated this field of medical advice. And, that's a really bad and destructive thing, but that's what's going on. And that's why, my rant yesterday, I believe it was, maybe the day before, about how, Donald Trump is killing people and the Republican Party is killing people, and they're doing it gleefully.
Well, the doctors aren't helping either, are they?
Well, I get it, Sonny, and I agree with you. I just, I think about a general practitioner in rural Alabama who wants to hang on to his practice and doesn't want his building burned down. It's a tough one. Sonny, I got to run. Thanks.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day in just a moment, and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to draw people's attention to a more global perspective on our troops leaving Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of myopic journalism that's presenting this as some sort of a ticking time bomb of a disaster. What's going on in international news reports is that the Afghanistan situation is very important to the Iranian government, the Turkish government, and to the Russian government, and that they are in direct diplomatic talks with the diplomatic component of the Taliban. Basically, right now in Iran, over 2 million Afghani refugees are living, and this is a result of decades of warfare and people fleeing for their lives. If the Taliban tears Afghanistan to pieces and creates a humanitarian disaster, more people are going to be fleeing into the Iranian nation because their border is absolutely enormous. It's several hundred miles. People can come in from every which direction. In addition to that, a lot of them can't really stay in Iran because the Iranian economy is so squeezed by European and American economic sanctions that they're running right across into Turkey that has a better economy and also lets them walk into the European Union.
Right, and they're also fleeing into Pakistan.
And then exactly, and on the other side you have Pakistan. But from the Russian perspective, they were the first to invade the major powers way back in the 70s. Those Islamic Soviet republics are now independent states like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. They're enormous. If the Taliban starts going into those nations, they'll be creating these Islamic cells and training camps that'll be going into Russia and causing problems. Yeah. Nobody wants to have Afghanistan fall to pieces. The fact that we're leaving, we're setting off a bomb in that region, and the major players of Iran, Turkey, and Russia all want that contained. They're pressing diplomatically for some sort of shared power.
Well, and the Taliban itself, by the way, Paul, I don't know if you've heard any of the interviews, but the foreign minister for the Taliban speaks good English. And he was interviewed on, I think it was NPR that I heard this, like a week and a half ago, and he was like, we're not the old Taliban. We are going to allow women to go to school. We're going to be maybe a little more liberal than Saudi Arabia, who is one of your allies. And we're not the crazy people anymore. We're going to run a responsible government.
Right. It's a different situation. And just the final note. There's a sliver of land. It's a corridor. The border is China. Mm-hmm. You're talking about a group of people supposedly that are going to go wild and create this humanitarian disaster within Afghanistan. It won't stay in Afghanistan. People will be running to Pakistan, China. They'll be heading into Turkey. They'll be heading into Iran. All those people are going to contain it. And the Turkish government has already proposed that NATO have an umbrella organization which they will fund and man. They will put the Turkish army on Bagram Air Base to make sure that the United States can come in, or anybody else who will help.
Paul, I got to run. I wish Joe Biden would say what you just said. Thank you very much for that. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Pete in Indian Wells. Hey, Pete, what's up?
Well, hi, Tom. I understand. It's my understanding that Michael Flynn's brother was promoted to the head of the Pacific Fleet.
That's correct.
And I'm sure that he was, I'm not certain, but I think that he was at the January 6th event.
He was one of the people who was on the call where the Pentagon basically said, no, we're not going to let the National Guard go defend the Capitol.
Can't we get rid of this guy? I mean, this doesn't seem right to me.
It doesn't seem right to me either, Pete. But, I don't run the military. But you would think that the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, would have some thoughts on this or something to do with it. And at the very least, this guy wouldn't get a promotion. But maybe there's something I don't know. But it's at the very least, it's unseemly, shall we say. Pete, thanks for the call. Holly in Washington, D.C. Hey, Holly, what's up?
Well, this is a loaded bunch of inquiries, probably requires you pointing me to a source. But when they say they're going to cut Social Security, what does that mean? And under what authority would allow that cut? And where are the laws to protect people who have paid in their whole lives?
Right.
And that all of a sudden they're not getting their checks cut in half with no recourse.
Right. First of all, I don't know of anybody who is saying, yes, I want to cut Social Security. There have been efforts to change the way that the cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, are calculated. There was one that was proposed during the Obama administration that got shot down, but was called the chain CPI, which would have reduced the rate of increase of Social Security payments. During the George W. Bush administration, back in 1978, he ran for Congress in Texas on the single issue of privatizing Social Security, making it no longer a government program, handing it off to Citibank or one of the big banks, Wells Fargo or something, and saying, you guys run it now. And after 2004, that was when he made the famous statement in 2005, I just won the election, I've got all kinds of political capital now, I'm going to use it. And he did a 23 city tour promoting the idea of privatizing Social Security. And the more cities he visited, the less popular the idea became. So he finally gave up on that. But the Republicans still want to privatize Social Security. On the other hand, you've got Democrats who are saying it loudly, we need to get rid of the cap. Right now, if you make more than, I think it's $140,000 a year, more or less, you stop paying Social Security taxes on every penny you make above that $140,000. And the Democratic proposal is, let's have everybody pay into it, and that way we can not only have it fully funded and well into the future, but we can actually give people raises. I also personally think that it's crazy that people who made a lot of money during their life get a lot of money on Social Security, and people who had low incomes during their life get low amounts of Social Security. I think it's frankly backwards, if anything. But Holly, that's everything I know about it, and I got to run. I'm sorry, but check out socialsecurityworks.org. It's Alex Lawson's website. Alex has done fill-in work for me here on the show, and he's been a guest many times. And socialsecurityworks.org is just an amazing resource for anything that has to do with Social Security. Hey, thanks so much to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick White, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jabbermocky, Jay LeBlanc, Carner Arroyo, and Carne Verdi for helping run this show. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. Have a great weekend.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!